Welcome everyone to our webinar on how to franchise your business. My name is Cameron and I'm a senior associate in LegalVision's franchising team. And I'm joined today by my colleague Taylor, who's an associate in our team. We thank you very much for your time. Before we begin, there are a couple of housekeeping slides to explain how this webinar is going to work. So you will receive a recording that will be sent to your email, as well as a copy of your slides. So you can take notes, but we'll make sure you get those copies later. During the webinar, if you have any questions at all, feel free to submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll answer them at the end. And finally, once the webinar is completed, you'll be prompted to complete a survey, which is an opportunity to provide any feedback or submit further questions you may have had about the webinar. And finally, for all webinar attendees, you will receive the offer to have a complimentary legal consultation to discuss with us how we can set up your franchise network, develop any contracts, or help you with any of your other legal needs. To request your free consultation, provide us with your contact details using the survey function that appears at the end of the webinar. So today's webinar, we're going to be covering a few key topics to help set up your franchise network. We'll be talking about protecting your brand with trademarks. We'll be talking about your corporate structure for your franchise network. And then we'll talk about systems and processes and how to codify these processes in the operations manual. And finally, we'll finish with some fun legal documents and compliance and the Q&A, as I mentioned. So first off, I'll give a bit of introduction about protecting your brand. So when you are going to franchise your business, whether it's an early business or a new business or one that has been existing for a while, it's important to choose a training name that is memorable and relevant to the area that you're operating in. Since the value of your franchise network will be attributable to the brand recognition, choosing a name is incredibly important. Now, once you choose a name and you've registered this with the company's register, you also want to protect it by getting a trademark. Now, for those who don't know, a trademark is a word or phrase or logo that is connected to your business and helps identify and distinguish your business from your competitors. So you may all be familiar with the slogan, "I'm loving it," by McDonald's, and the golden arches, which are part of separate trademark applications. Now, it's important to remember that once you register a company, if you go that route and you register a business name, this isn't the same as having protection via trademarks. So a trademark is a process that helps you make sure you have exclusive rights over the use of that particular image, brand, or slogan. And it means that you can take legal action against others to stop them from using your brand or anything that is similar to that, because they'll be benefiting from your reputation and goodwill that obviously you want to benefit yourself and for your franchisees. So getting registrations for your trademarks early is incredibly important, because when a franchisee joins the network, they'll be looking to make sure that their future in the business, be that 5, 10, 20 or more years, is going to be protected, and the brand and the value in that brand will grow and stay with the network. For your benefits, the trademarks can last for 10 years, but they can also be renewed on an ongoing basis. And as a franchisor, you should think about the timing of when you want to start in New Zealand, but also if you want to consider expanding to other countries for your franchise in the future, because you'll need to consider doing trademark applications in those other countries. And finally, when you are in the process of franchising a business, we always recommend doing a check to see other competitive businesses that may have similar names, slogans, or images to you. Not only can this affect your trademark registration, but it also may create some risk that you may have to rebrand in the future if there is a trademark dispute. And obviously, this can be very disruptive for franchisees. So hopefully that gives a good overview of trademark protection. And now Taylor is going to talk a little bit about some corporate structures that we recommend for franchisors.
So we are often asked the correct or the best company structure for franchising businesses, and there are a range of them. However, we do recommend incorporating a holding company that would own the trademarks and other intellectual property. We recommend incorporating a company to act as franchisor to enter into the franchise agreements with franchisees. And if the business operates from a premises, a separate leasing company to enter into the leases also. This is the usual structure that most franchisors adopt. The importance of having this type of company structure is basically for your protection and for the protection of your assets. The holding company shouldn't trade with or enter into contracts with any third parties. This means that your valuable intellectual property is protected and not put at risk. The franchising company's primary purpose is obviously to enter into franchise agreements with franchisees. And the franchising company generally doesn't have any assets. So if there is a dispute that arises with a franchisee and the franchising company is sued, there's no assets that are put at risk. This is similar to the leasing company's sole purpose, entering into leases, and that would be used obviously for the franchise businesses. The leasing company also doesn't hold any assets. So if there's a dispute with a landlord due to outstanding rent and the leasing company is sued, there's no assets again put at risk, and the leasing company can actually be wound up if necessary. This can, however, mean that personal guarantees or bank guarantees may need to be provided by directors or companies with assets. It's just something to keep in mind. With the company structuring process, usually the founders will be the shareholders of the holding company, and the franchising and leasing companies will be subsidiaries of this holding company. If there's an existing operating company, this can either remain as outside of the new structure, or it can actually be restructured to be a subsidiary of the holding company. Likewise, any new corporate stores should be owned by new operating companies that can either sit within this structure as a subsidiary of the holding company, or they can remain separate. Just a consideration as well with IP licensing, that you do need to ensure that the holding company that holds this IP licenses the right to use the intellectual property. This includes trademarks, technology, any branded materials, to the operating company and to the franchising company, which then allows the franchising company to sub-license similar rights to the franchisees. Now, Cameron's going to talk through some of the systems and processes that you should be considering as a franchise operator.
Thank you very much, Taylor. So if we assume that you are operating a business or you have a plan for your business, you will have thought about how you want that business to operate and to grow and succeed. And part of those processes will probably include things like marketing plans and your operations of the business. And these are incredibly relevant for franchising a business as well, because this is what you'll have to roll out to franchisees. So having a determined marketing plan or strategy is essential for outlining your vision to grow the franchise network, because this will also set out what the franchisor will need to do to help you market the network or your own or their own businesses as well. And particularly as a franchisor, you have a lot of control over the kind of marketing and the types of materials that franchisees will produce. So having a consideration for what you want those marketing channels to be and methodologies for franchisees is incredibly important upfront. For example, some franchisors require franchisees to undertake local marketing and obtain physical pamphlets or billboards, or engage with their local businesses through promotions and partnerships. Whereas you also may want franchisees to run their own social media, or perhaps you'd want to manage this yourself. So these are a few considerations that you'll need to think about from a marketing perspective. And in terms of the systems and processes, the easiest way to work this out is look at the way that your business currently operates, or if you are just starting out, how you think it will operate. The functions that you use in your business are what you'll be rolling out to franchisees. And often the value that you can offer to franchisees is by giving them a guidebook on how to run this kind of business using the goods or services that you already provide. Now, some of the systems that you might use, for example, could include the point of sales software that you utilize because it integrates nicely with your customer relationship management. Or it may be some internal policies and procedures that you use for dealing with customer complaints or providing the services, be it a sales pitch or internal training documents that you use regularly. Now, obviously, if you've been operating a business for a while, you would have a lot of this knowledge yourself. But for franchising, it's important to make sure that these systems and processes are clearly defined and ideally written down. This is so that anyone can actually pick them up and continue with them, because at its heart, this is what franchising is about. And we always recommend having a think about this before you actually get franchisees on board, because it will make them easier to get onboarded once they see what's there. Now, I've just outlined a few examples of kind of the key things that come up in franchising. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the things that are unique about franchising is obviously how the franchisees will collect their data and report their sales data revenue to you, and also report on how their businesses are going. The payment obligations and particular processes you need for them, if you're going to be invoicing them or other way around. But also for franchising, if you do work in a product space, how goods are meant to be ordered and which suppliers will equipment come from. And these are things that are a little bit more unique to franchising. And finally, some of those, my apologies. Finally, some of those internal considerations for managing the data for clients and any procedures for communicating with them, as well as onboarding and offboarding of employee and other internal software and systems are things that, whilst you can develop and grow over time, it's important to have a think at the start how they should be. Now, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that these systems and processes are easy to follow and successful will make them easier to replicate in the network. And this will help ensure the success of your network, because if it's a model that can be easily rolled out and replicated, and there's clear business processes for the franchisees to follow, it'll help them become more successful and in turn help your brand. Now, I've talked about codifying this, and Taylor's going to talk about how you can put some of these systems and processes in a way that's easy to understand for franchisees. So
the easiest way to do exactly what Cameron's just talked about is to create an operations manual. The operation manual obviously will kind of contain all of these systems and processes, and it's a document which takes all of your know-how on how to successfully operate your business and summarizes it in a clear and concise way for franchisees. It can be used as part of an induction and initial training for franchisees, as well as for ongoing performance improvement. The importance of a really cohesive operations manual is that it's crucial to your expansion as a franchise network. It provides all of your franchisees with all of the information that they need to replicate your business successfully and how you want it to be replicated. The operations manual is also highly confidential, as it's essentially a playbook on all of the key information required to understand how your business operates. The operations manual obviously will contain a lot of information. Some of this can include how to handle customers, including how to deal with complaints, who your approved suppliers are, or your approved product list. It can also include information on how to onboard employees, and often any employee policies are also outlined in the operations manual. And within that as well, there are also resources which the franchisee may require in the operation of their business or as part of a franchise. These are just some of the things that can be contained in an operations manual, but as Cameron's mentioned, we do recommend that it is cohesive as possible and as detailed as possible. A lot of franchisors now ask how to prepare an operations manual, and it might sound simple, but it is the best places to start looking at all of the systems and processes that you have in place within your own business, and basically take that information, what are usually questions asked by others in the business, and put it down on paper. The best operations manuals we found are drafted by franchise consultants who work with you by discussing all of the aspects of your business, and they help to summarize all of these different systems and processes within a detailed and official operations manual. Now, most of the operations manual isn't legal. That's what the franchise agreement is for. However, there are some policies and information within the operations manual which do have legal implications. We'd always recommend working with a franchise consultant to get a proper operations manual drafted, and then have a lawyer to review specific sections which relate to yours and the franchisee's legal obligations. These can include employment contracts, privacy policies, or dispute notices. And these are all items that should be contained in your operations manual. Now, another question we do often get asked is, when should the operations manual be provided to franchisees? And given that the operations manual contains incredibly confidential information, we do recommend that this should only be provided to franchisees in certain situations. So before an individual becomes a franchisee, they should only be provided with the operations manual when they've signed a non-disclosure agreement. Or we often find franchisors allow prospective franchisees to inspect the operations manual in a meeting or to request specific extracts, but to not actually be provided with a copy of the document. Once the franchisee has signed the franchise agreement with relevant restraints and their confidentiality obligations, they can be provided with a copy, but it must be handed back when they cease being a franchisee. Now, Cameron's going to discuss some of the legal documents and compliance that should also be considered.
Finally, the slide that everyone has been waiting for. So we often get asked by individuals and companies who are looking to franchise their business, what documents do I actually need? Now, the document we always start with is the franchise agreement. And this is the main contract that is entered between the franchisor and each franchisee individually, which outlines the commercial relationship and obviously a lot of the legal considerations. Now, while the franchise agreement is generally standardized between you and each of the franchisees, it can obviously change over time and there may be some negotiations. However, broadly speaking, a franchise agreement will set out the rights and obligations of the franchisor and franchisee to each other, including things like initial training and support, and some of those other processes we mentioned that are core to legal obligations, such as reporting and compliance. A franchise agreement may also cover what area the franchisee has to market in, like I mentioned earlier, and whether this territory or local marketing area has any exclusivity rights or rights of priority over leads and inquiries, because this is also quite key for franchisees to understand before entering into it. Now, as a contract, a franchise agreement will also outline what kinds of fees are payable by the franchisee to the franchisor and when these are payable. The franchise agreement will also talk about who are the people involved in the franchisee's business, be that the directors, the principals, the managers, people who are guaranteeing the franchisee's performance, known as guarantors, and also how these can change if the franchisee ever wanted to sell the business or transfer it to another person. And finally, if you are operating your franchise network from leased premises, the franchise agreement will contain provisions that talk about how a leased premises is obtained and acquired. And this is where the franchisor can often set out its requirements or approvals for what the franchisee needs to do to get those premises secured. And I did mention compliance as well. This can differ depending on the area that the franchise operates in, but broadly speaking, they are sometimes generally. And when we're preparing franchise agreements for clients, we always also talk to them about how long they want the franchise term to be, and also what are the considerations for granting any additional terms, what we refer to as renewals or extensions. And this is because the franchise agreement covers all aspects of the franchise relationship, from the first entry into the franchise agreement and any pre-entry conditions, to governing issues that might arise during the franchise relationship, including breaches, disputes, and terminations. And then finally, any ongoing restrictions that may apply after the franchise relationship has come to an end, governing mostly intellectual property, confidential information, and any non-compete provisions. Now, I've mentioned compliance a couple of times. Now, as some of you may be aware, there's no single law that governs the franchising industry, unlike other countries in the world. Now, what we do often talk to franchisors about, new or existing, is whether they do want to opt in to comply with the Franchise Association of New Zealand's requirements, or FANZ, by becoming a member. And we find that many of our franchisors that work in New Zealand do choose to become a FANZ member because of the consistency that being a member and the expectations of members can provide to the network. So at a high level, what FANZ members versus franchisors need to do that is different to non-FANZ franchisors is they need to prepare a disclosure document and otherwise comply with the requirements set out by the FANZ Code of Practice. Now, the disclosure document is a prescribed document that is relatively similar between different franchisors, and it contains a lot of information that a prospective franchisee will want to know to give them some insights to decide whether to join a franchise network or not. Now, other FANZ requirements also include when you have to provide this disclosure document and other policies such as the Code of Practice and Code of Ethics to franchisees before entry into the franchise agreement, usually 7 to 14 days, depending on circumstances. But the code of practice will also put some ongoing obligations on a franchisor, such as when to update the disclosure document each year and when to have their documents submitted for scrutiny by the FANZ committee. Now, in the code of practice that is set up by FANZ and updated, both franchisors and franchisees have obligations to each other to act ethically, with honesty and lawfully, to pursue the best business practice, as well as providing some additional rights, such as offering cooling off period after entry into the franchise agreement, setting out dispute resolution procedures, and a general obligation to avoid conduct which would result in a significant detriment if it is unnecessary and unreasonable based on the risks or not necessary to protect the franchise network. So by looking at the code of practice and code of ethics, you see that there is a little bit more structure that governs the franchise relationship and can generally help parties manage the network ongoing. Now, as a franchisor just starting out, you don't have to decide whether to join FANZ upfront, but it's something that you may want to look into because it may end up affecting, and likely will end up affecting, the ways in which you must recruit and onboard franchisees and govern the network generally. Now, I did mention the disclosure document. I won't go into too much detail, but so you are aware, some of the information that disclosure document provides to franchisees based on the FANZ requirements, information about the franchisor, such as who its directors and key personnel, what are their experience and qualifications. It includes some overview of the litigation history of a franchisor, which obviously for a new franchisor, hopefully will be none, and for ongoing should be none, but that is one of the requirements. But also the financial position of the franchisor, which based on the corporate structure you choose, this may be relevant to consider whether those assets are put and how you explain to franchisees the franchising company doesn't have strong assets, but its parent company does, as well as obviously rights to use intellectual property. And the disclosure document will also include details about any current and previous franchisees. So the first franchisor, there won't really be any, but as this grows, you'll obviously put more details in there. Now, to summarize the importance of legal documents and compliance, obviously lawyers were going to recommend having these drafted properly. But one of the key things that we find with franchisors who are starting out is you want to make sure that the franchise agreement reflects the business model that you want franchisees to replicate and the system that you want them to adopt. And we've talked in this webinar about your operations manual and codifying those systems and processes, but the franchise agreement is how you can actually enforce compliance and set those standards from a legal perspective, which is important to protecting your brand and the goodwill associated with it. And we do find that the more successful franchisors are the one who set these expectations clearly and transparently from the beginning. And because the operations manual isn't always provided upfront, sometimes it's worthwhile having some key legal obligations in the franchise agreement taught upfront, especially about business performance and milestones and targets, to make sure that you're starting the franchise relationship on the right foot. And obviously, because there are other laws that can apply to franchisors, such as consumer law and corporate law, we always want to make sure that the franchise agreement and other documents that you're providing are legally compliant to avoid any other issues down the line. Well, thank you very much for staying with us. We hope you found this webinar informative. We've included a link here, and the link will be sent in the slides as well for our franchisor toolkit. And this is a really useful document that will touch upon it and go into some more details on some of the key areas we talked about today. If any of you would like to see the corporate structure map, that's in the document, as well as other information about intellectual property licensing, as well as some testimonials from our franchisor clients. So I do recommend checking that resource. I go back and look at it very regularly, and I'm sure you'll find it quite useful. Now, if this webinar has gotten you excited to franchise a network, then we do recommend checking out an upcoming event that is happening on the 15th of August. It's called How to Manage Your Franchise Network. And this webinar presented by my colleagues will go into a little bit more detail about growing an early stage network and managing one that's already ongoing. And we'll touch upon some of the things we discussed today, but provide some more guidance and strategy moving on. And we'll get to your questions shortly, so please feel free to, I can see we've got some coming through, so that's excellent. I'll just briefly talk about how LegalVision assists our clients start and expand their franchising journey. So if you do want to become a LegalVision member, your business will get unlimited access to our team of 100 specialized lawyers across New Zealand and also Australia, depending on your needs, which is kind of like having your own in-house counsel for a fraction of the cost. So what we do for our franchise or clients or clients looking to franchise is obviously unlimited document drafting and reviewing, which includes things like your franchise agreement. And if you do want to become a FANZ member, preparing your disclosure document and advising on that. We can help with trademark applications, both domestic and international, and we'll talk through some of the structures for that. But also you'll get unlimited legal advice consultations, which is where you can book a request in for any lawyer in a team and ask them for assistance on a particular topic. So to learn more about how membership can help you, request a free consultation with our team using the survey that appears at the end of the webinar to check out how that might help you. All right, so we've got some questions that have been submitted. We'll talk about some of the ones that submitted earlier, and then I'll get some of that have come through. So please feel free to keep submitting questions. So one question from attendee was, what should I watch out for? And what are the typical mistakes that a new business makes when looking to franchise their network? So this is an excellent question. And there are a few key things I always recommend to clients looking to franchise. One is obviously protect your brand early. And even if you aren't looking at franchising just yet, getting trademark protection is beneficial in any circumstance. And doing this ahead of time is really important. And that goes hand in hand with choosing a brand that is identifiable and that you think other people will also want to join in. Remember, your business may have a unique identity, but if that's not something that you think will appeal to a mass market or franchisees will want to join, you may want to consider rebranding early. And then, as we've also touched on during this webinar, making sure that you have business processes that are established and functional, and then also codified so you can set those standards for franchisees upfront. Those are normally the key things. And if you don't get those right, the start of your franchise journey can be quite difficult. Taylor, do you want to take the next question about fees?
Yeah, so we had a question come in about what fees are usually involved in a franchise business. Look, this does vary business to business, franchise to franchise. However, the kind of standard franchise fees that we see are the initial franchise fee for a franchisee to join your franchise network, potentially a training fee for your expertise and your training that you offer the franchisee to bring them on board. There's an ongoing royalty fee, which covers the rights and the franchisee's rights to use your IP and your trademarks and your brand during the term of the agreement. A marketing fee for any marketing that you take on as franchisor, and fees for approving transfers or assignments within the term of the franchise agreement. Some additional fees that we do see in franchise business, but they are less common, are any additional support or training fee that you, for training or support that you provide the franchisee outside of that initial training, administration fees, lead fees, if you receive leads through a website and you provide them to a franchisee, and potentially breach fees or damages. Obviously less common. We don't want to see them all that often. However, these are fees to consider. Another question that we received was advice on the correct business structure for a franchise setup. We did cover this off in the presentation, and there is further information in the franchisor toolkit. However, it does depend on your business itself. There are many different options, and we'd recommend that you consider what's most appropriate for your business. Cameron, did you want to take the next question regarding standards during operation?
Yeah, so we did have a question that was asked, what happens if the franchisee does not meet the standards after a while of operating, and is there a time frame to end the agreement or refuse renewal? Now, a lot of these considerations are, as I mentioned, covered by the franchise agreement. Some of those avenues could include performance management or additional training, or even potentially changes to the way the business operates, if there might actually be an exception to the exclusivity in their area if they're not performing, or they may lose some priority rights over inquiries. And if you have offered some sort of compliance discount for royalty fees, that may go away. So there are a few different ways you can look at it before considering to terminate. But the process of issuing a breach notice and going through that management may be discussed, and I think we'll discuss in our webinar happening next month about managing a network. And the publication will also talk about it as well, in terms of going through renewal or not, and setting up those requirements that you need a franchisee to commit before renewing. For example, if they aren't using the branding correctly, or if they are still using old suppliers, you may say to them you need them to fix this before granting them a further renewal term. And generally would recommend doing this at least 6 months ahead of time, so that you can make sure that the franchisee has learned and improved their practices and will be operating consistently before you decide to give them another term. We've got a question, and Taylor, this one may be good for you to answer. It's what is the best practice about sharing financials before an agreement is in place? Now, thank you very much for this question. So we assume this is about sharing the financials for an operating business, maybe one that the franchise was operating. So Taylor, do you mind taking on that question?
Of course. So sharing financials before an agreement is in place, it can be done. It is more of a personal choice, and that's up to you to kind of determine. Some franchisees will likely want to see profit and loss for an existing store. So you may be willing to show them the previous financial year's profit and loss. That may be something that you'd consider. You definitely don't want to be misleading to franchisees. That's definitely something to keep in mind. So when you're considering, I guess, providing them with any financials, you want to make sure that they are aware of the actual return of that store, and definitely don't guarantee any financial returns in line with that. Don't provide them a guarantee that they may see a certain return. It's up to them to make that decision with any independent and accounting advice or an accountant that they have involved. It's definitely a personal choice. We see certain franchisors have meetings rather than provide the information without the context, and they'll sit down with the franchisees and walk through all of these considerations. So it's definitely more of a personal choice for your business and whether you want to provide these.
Thank you very much.
Cameron, did you?
Good. I'll take the next question which you received, which is what sort of platforms or techniques are used for gaining more franchisees or franchise locations without swamping clients with too much information? Again, I think some of these questions may be covered in our next webinar or our toolkit, but one of the important things for you to consider when you are thinking about franchising your business is how you want to divide those franchise areas and territories. And the most successful franchisors are the ones that plan ahead and have a vision of what they want it to look like. If you're going to have exclusive territories, then you'll need to make sure that those boundaries and divisions are appropriate. And how you map those may differ based on the area you live in. Some franchises look at demographics or business statistics provided by the government or other third-party organizations. Now, a franchise consultant can actually help you work out what kind of growth plans you want to have, but it's important for you to decide how you want the business to look. Do you want to have multiple franchisees all operating in the same area, potentially contacting clients individually, or do you want to manage those communications yourself, or do you want to keep franchisees operating completely different areas? So these are really useful things to think about upfront. We do have a question here, which is, can a financial advisor business be successful running as a franchise business? Look, I recommend booking a consultation with us to have a chat with our team. The short answer is that any business can be successful as a franchise, provided that there is sufficient value in the brand and it's recognizable, and that the systems and processes that are followed can be regulated and controlled by a franchisor. Now, when you're providing financial advice, we need to look into these additional restrictions that may apply based on your qualifications. But if this is something that you can standardize and roll out, then it could be worth looking into. One of the risks we always say to clients looking to franchise or franchise network is you want your service, the services and processes to be easily replicated, but you want to make sure that what you're offering is still unique and novel, same as any other business. So I recommend getting in touch with us, and we can chat about how we might be able to help your legal needs. We've got a question here about how much does doing trademarks and how much does that cost? The cost for trademarking can differ. I didn't touch upon it earlier in the webinar, but when you do register a trademark, you consider how many categories of protection you want to have for that trademark. Now, those are referred to as classes, and classes typically cover different industries or different types of goods. So I used the McDonald's example earlier. So they would want to make sure that their classes cover foods and fast foods, but also potentially toys, or then sort of restaurants and retail, because it actually covers multiple different industries and classifications of goods or services. So the number of classes and categories that you put for your trademarks, that can increase the cost, as well as how many trademarks you want to get. If you just have one trademark for your logo, then you obviously pay less fees to the Intellectual Property Office in New Zealand. But if you want to have a trademark for your brand name and your slogan and several different logos because you're not quite sure which ones you'll end up using, then obviously this cost can increase. And I did mention it briefly, but if you are looking at getting trademark protection outside of New Zealand, there are multiple different ways you can do it. I won't go into it in this slide, but definitely book a consultation with us, because you can either do direct application to other countries, or there are some agreements between other countries through the World Intellectual Property Organization and Madrid protocols, and they can actually help you expand through other networks. And I think we've got one more question. If there's any more questions, feel free to submit them. But we do have one more question that was submitted, which is, what are the fees involved to set up a franchise for the franchisor? One of probably the biggest fees you'll look at will be your legal, accounting, and business fees. Now, this is actually the same for a franchisee, but for a franchisor, doing this upfront investment is key, because you want to make sure that your corporate structure is correct. And if you want to operate as a group, or you have some tax considerations or trust considerations, getting it right from the start is really important. And that's what your lawyers and your accountants or potentially tax advisors can help you with. Some things that I often say to clients who are looking to franchise their network is, what is their current plan? What is their 5-year plan? But then what is their 20 and 30-year plan? For some franchisors, the goal is to grow the network and then sell off pieces of it, or sell the network in its entirety. And this is why the corporate structure may help determine how you want to go about it. If you have a separate operating entity with your business that you can keep, and the franchising company is a distinct entity, then that allows you to divide the network in future if you do want to go separate ways, and similarly with leasing as well. So those structuring costs can often the bigger ones. If you do engage a franchise consultant to help with initial setup and drafting operations manual, as well as potentially with recruitment and advertising, that can those can contribute. And then finally, just regular things for operating a business, marketing, software and subscription costs. These are one of the, and obviously if you do want to operate from a premises, rent and other outgoings, these kind of things, similar to a normal business, but maybe a little bit expanded, because you're not just operating business, you're also trying to create a structure and codifying that around it. Well, if there are no more questions or any, I'll take last minute questions, but looks like it's covered everything. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. Just going to remind you that after the survey ends, you will receive a pop-up for a survey. We'd really appreciate if you could complete it. It will only take 30 seconds. And if there is anything that we didn't cover in today's webinar that you'd like to find out more information, that's a really good place to put it. And if you would like to receive a complimentary legal consultation with our team to discuss how we can franchise your business, please leave your contact details and we will get in touch. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a pleasant rest of your day.